yeah, as already mentioned briefly, so there's a couple of channels that you can use to interact with us during this workshop. Originally, we had planned this workshop obviously to take place in Dubrovnik and to be highly interactive. So of course, that's not that easy to replicate in a virtual session like this one with, I think, at least 100 participants from what I saw. But I think we really want to spend at least a third or so of the time answering your questions, discussing with you, getting your inputs on various topics. So please make sure that you really use the channels and respond to the polls that we've prepared. Yeah, so that having been said, this workshop is our opportunity more or less to present to you a project that we started about half a year ago about the generation of cross-border pan-European geospatial data sets and services, which is connected, of course, to a lot of initiatives. It has to do with Inspire, it has to do with the Open Data Directive, high-value data sets, and so on. We're going to give you a bit of a more detailed view into that in a moment. So that brings me to the agenda, things that we've planned for today. So first of all, we would actually like to invite the JRC to give a short perspective on, let's say, why they thought this project would make sense, why they engaged in the in setting it up, and why they are also working, basically together with us on it. Then Danny, as the coordinator of the project, will present the overall approach. So what are we trying to do? Basically getting from inaccessible and hard to use data to Inspire and ODD, Open Data Directive compliant harmonized data. Then we're getting to that point about what is actually a high data set, a high value data set. So how does a data set create value? How can we decide which ones to pick up in the process that we will present? And then I will highlight one very specific data set use case. So that's called the Future Forest AI project. And after that, we'll discuss the involvement of the data providers, specifically of Inspire data providers within the project. Yeah, as mentioned, it was supposed to be a very interactive workshop. And our goal as a project is to involve as many data providers as possible. That means working with you to harmonize data sets, to publish them in such a way that they are available as Inspire and ODD compliant harmonized data sets. And so we hope that this will be informative for you and that you can also take something away from that. But obviously it's going to be the start. So we want to set up relationships with many of you as possible after this and then really start going into the production of these high-value harmonized data sets. A very brief slide from me before we hand over to Alex. You might have seen this before if you've seen our presentations. So basically what drove us as we transformed to also say, okay, this is a workshop or this is a project that we really want to be part of is that we really want to drive the maturity of spatial data infrastructures forward. And obviously there's the three big goals. There's making the data accessible. That means that I can find it, that I can download it, that I can view it. We want to make it usable. That means I actually have documented, harmonized data on various levels. We also want to make it useful, which usually means that, for example, for GIS use, we want to have specific encodings that best work for that. For web applications, you might have GeoJSON and so on. So there's a lot of activities in that. And in this project, we're basically going to approach it from the other way around. So we will find out what does it take really for a data set to be useful, and then drive our processing and our publishing work so that in the end it really complies to that. And that hopefully helps us get the maturity on all these different levels further to the right. These bars are of course symbolic at this point, but obviously we want to have an infrastructure that's really reliable and usable for all these pressing problems, be it from the environmental and climate area, from the recovery, from digitalization and so on. So there's so many things that really need to have good data available. So that I think it's an important time, to have this up and running. We are going, as I mentioned, to use quite a few Slido polls. So you can, in parallel, go to slido.com, enter the event code Inspire 2020. And as usual, there's many rooms there. The one that this workshop matches is called something like GoPack. And yeah, we will during the, oops, sorry, this thing. We will then have, of course, yeah, these polls running later on, and you can contribute by adding your opinions. The other thing that you can do is to also send us questions. So if something is unclear, send a question either via Slido or via the chat. And after each block, we'll take a few minutes at the least to respond to these. Yeah, and with that, I would actually like to hand over to Alex for the introduction, setting the scene. Alex, should I drive the slides? Is he there already?
So, good morning, Torsten. Of course, I'm here. Can you see the slides I'm trying to share already?
Yes, I can see them.
Excellent. Great. Well, we'll just put them on full screen. I hope that works for all of you. Good morning from me as well, Alex Kotzer from the JRC. Indeed, as already mentioned by Torsten, this project is very interesting for us. I will try to elaborate a little bit on the reasons behind that a little bit later, but I would like to start this presentation by saying a few words about the broader context. Then we'll zoom into the European political agenda, and because it was already communicated, this is more of an interactive, more of a brainstorming session. I would like to finish this short intervention by sharing a few thoughts from our perspective. So immediately diving into the details. The context. I know that we all see those kind of visualizations very often. We actually look into the exponential growth of data. Those visualizations talk about petabytes of data, trillions of dollars, what we generate every single minute. So yeah, I think we have all seen a lot of those. I don't want to elaborate on that. I know that we all have seen this, and it is clear that the volumes of data that we're dealing with are growing at an exponential pace. What is important, I think, for our meeting today is to think a little bit on what happens actually when we need this data. We have this horrible situation with the COVID. We need all the possible data that is available. We need environmental data, health data, population data, migration, transportation, and so on and so on. What turns out is that not all of this data is available, at least not available to all of us. If it is available, probably it is not accessible in the right format. Or there is some licensing information missing. So actually, this is, I see as quite a serious paradox here. On the one hand, we have the petabytes and all the exponential growth. But on the other hand, we as societies cannot really leverage on all of that in the current situation. So I think this is something that we, as a geospatial community, have to, as Inspire community as well, have to somehow address collectively. And actually, thinking a little bit more about who has access to the data, there are of course, different actors involved, increasingly so the private sector, citizens, academia, last but not least, the public authorities. But then there are two very distinct perspectives on data. On the one hand, we have the more, let's say, private perspective view on data, which actually considers data as the new oil, as they say, where whoever mines the data owns it, can reuse it, can sell it, can package it, and can see it as an asset and can profit. On the other very extreme perspective, we have open data, where data is seen as a public good that can be reused, that can be shared. And I think a lot of us here in the audience have been working in this and supporting and also believe strongly in open data. But then, is it really a game changer? As said, we believe in it, and we in Europe have really rich traditions and excellent experiences in working with open data. I checked yesterday the Global Open Data the Index, and actually, if you look at the top 50 ranking in terms of the maturity and the availability of open data on the global level, what you will find inside is 19 EU member states, and France is the highest ranking EU member, ranking number 4. So indeed, we have a lot of traditions. But there are there any limits to that? Can we just start going into the open data movement and release all of our data? Well, there are issues. First of all, are we making the right data available? Torsten mentioned in his introductory sentences this. If we're just releasing data for the sake of releasing the data or checking a box and no one uses it, then what is the value in it? But then also things become complicated immediately if we go on the individual level. If we want to release data for citizens, then we have problems again, because there is statistical confidentiality, privacy, ethical issues, legislation, GDPR, and so on. And then, of course, our topics that we discuss usually quite heavily on Inspire conferences, like formats, APIs, harmonization, etc. So within this complex setting with the different perspectives, the public and the private, we have a really ambitious EU political agenda defined by the two pillars, the two priorities that we have heard already many times during the past days of the conference. The Europe Fit for the digital age, with the recently released in February European Strategy for Data, the white paper on artificial intelligence, and of course, very important for our debate today, the open data directive. And on the other hand, we have the European Green Deal priority, which is with the Green Data for All initiative, the modernization of the Inspire the directive, and initiatives like the Digital Destination Earth. So all of this is on a conceptual or on a policy level meant to work together. So these are not silos or mutually exclusive activities. On the contrary, it only makes sense if the challenges that exist are addressed together. Allow me to elaborate very briefly on the European Strategy for Data, because it is very important for us. On a conceptual level, the objective that it defines is the establishment of a pan-European single market for data. And it is doing so by establishing sector-specific data spaces in 9 different sectors that actually are not to be seen as isolated, but the idea is that there is also horizontal flows of data, exchanges of data between the different data spaces. Then also the public contribution within this ambitious European strategy for data. There is the high-value data set concept, which we will be discussing today, plays a really prominent role inside. So harmonized pan-European data that are made available through APIs in a simple and digestible manner. Then we have another very interesting assumption here, which I think is also worth our attention. The assumption in the data strategy is that edge computing and Internet of Things data will play a lot more important role in the near future in our mix of data, and will be generally contributing to the huge volumes of data that is generated. If now IoT is assumed to be generating at edge 20% of the data. The forecast is that in 5 years, it will be contributing 80%, with all the implications on the architectures of our data infrastructures, of how we deal with processing, aggregating, and analyzing data. Then there is also a very prominent role of personal data, of course, in full accordance with GDPR. And there's a lot of thinking inside how to actually try to tap into this resource, of course, doing it in the European way, so preserving the privacy and taking ethics into consideration. And then also, there is a lot of thinking about the contribution of the different actors. So it's not meant to be implemented by the public sector, by the private sector, by citizens, but the idea is to bring all together and come up with something that is meaningful. If you look at the text, it's a very interesting piece of strategic document, because it does not define any rigid ex-ante specification. So it is deliberately decided, mainly by our colleagues in DG Connect, to not over-specify upfront everything. So there is a strong emphasis in this strategic document, which is quite innovative from my perspective, on what is called regulatory sandboxing. So really testing things together with all the partners, coming up with something that really works, in an agile manner, and in collaboration with the different actors. On collaboration in particular, clearly, there are different incentives that need to a certain extent be satisfied in order to retain the interest of the actors in participating in such an endeavor. But I think also what is important to emphasize here is that the approaches that are put forward within the strategy also work towards building trust between the different contributors, users, different actors in the data economy. Last but not least, there is a prominent role for the so-called data steward, data integrator, who can actually put all of this together. Finally, some concluding points for the project that we're discussing today. I think contributing harmonized public sector data remains a fundamental priority. I know that there's a lot of emphasis on private nowadays, on cities and on IoT, but still the public sector plays a very important, probably different role than the past. Conditions, I think, defined by the global context, but also by the political agenda, are excellent for data-driven innovation. We have the political context, but we have also new kinds of standards. We have APIs, we have mature and ready technology. And I think the approach that we should undertake also with the OPEC, we can start with 5 member states, I think, which is in the core of the project. And then scale beyond that. I think it's very convincing if we have an example of data made available, harmonized, 5 member states, and then others can possibly join. I think what we need to also do is think of sustainability early on, from the very beginning, to ensure that this has a future. And then also what can be done is enrich data in an agile manner, in the spirit of the European data strategy that was presented. So start, for example, with a certain scale of the geospatial data, smaller, and then work towards coming up with the larger scale versions, enrich the attributes, combine data from the private and public, look into citizen contributions, and indeed, what was mentioned, tailor everything to the user needs, and use as much as possible standard-based APIs. And then I stop here. Over to you, Torsten. Thanks a lot for the attention and for having me.
Yeah, thank you very much, Alex, for the great introduction. Yeah, that's a big challenge, of course, but as you mentioned, we want to start small. So we've basically started preparing in the last few months to be ready. And how exactly we're going to do this project is now something that Danny is going to talk about. Danny, are you ready?
Yes, do you hear me?
Yes, we hear you very well. Okay.
Okay.
You should be able to be made presenter.
Yeah. Share content. Hey, do you see my screen?
Yes, we do.
Okay. Okay, thanks, Torsten, for the introduction, and also thanks, Alex, for your perspective and your linkage to ongoing initiatives at European level. I think it's quite relevant. And I will try to provide a brief overview of why we submitted this proposal, how we look at it, and I think it fits well in what Alex has been saying and presenting. So I'm Danny van den Broeke. I'm the coordinator of GOPIC, working at University of Leuven in Belgium. And I will explain also, of course, our consortium in this presentation. I will first say a few words about the CEF Telecom program, because we are part of that, and maybe some of you are not really aware of CEF as a program, and specifically CEF Telecom. The objectives of our project I will briefly introduce as well, and the specific objectives of the project mainly. The team I will shortly explain, and how we see to deliver and develop the project over the project lifetime. CEF is the Connecting European Facility, which is an important program also for more operational parts of things that have been developed, for example, in ISA Square, where prototypes and IDs, vocabularies are developed in the ICT sector. But here in the CEF program, different things are coming together. Of course, the European Connecting European Facility is not only about telecom. There is also one on energy, for example. So there are several ones. But the one that we are specifically interested in and focusing on is this CEF Telecom sub-program. The major objective of CEF Telecom is to facilitate cross-border interaction between public administrations, business and citizens by deploying digital services and digital service infrastructures and broadband networks. So this idea of broadband networks and HPC is coming back in different calls all the time. So what CEF is doing, they have regular calls for submitting projects, and through these projects should contribute to the creation of what is called the European ecosystem of interoperable and interconnected digital services. So that's basically the idea, to have solutions, new approaches, and as Alex said, also test new ideas and methods to offer this type of services. And the idea is that if we have many of these services deployed throughout these different projects, that many of them sustain over time and that they become, in fact, operational and part of this ecosystem. And all these or this ecosystem should then support the digital single market. There are often some specific calls. In 2018, there was a specific call on public open data, and this specific call was also supported by DG Connect. So it was collaboration, and of course everything falls under the INEA, the agency, but usually different DGs are involved. And in fact, our GOPEC project was a proposal under this specific call end of 2018. What was this public open data call focusing upon? In summary, it was focusing to support the generation, aggregation of cross-border and cross-domain. That's a key word: cross-border, cross-domain, reuse of open data sets. But also part of the call was really on HPC, high performance computing, to facilitate data exchange and reuse. So this is, generally speaking, the objective of that particular call, but the call contained three sub-objectives. They are mentioned here. And in fact, GOPEC, they were all interesting and relevant, by the way, and there were many proposals, but our proposal fitted mostly under Objective 2, which is the generation of cross-border services, providing access to harmonized thematic open data sets and corresponding metadata. I will come back to that, what that exactly means. At the end, the public open data call under that objective, because there were a lot more accepted proposals, but there were many proposals under these other objectives. There were 11 projects accepted, and okay, I did not list them all, but you can see that besides GOPEC is one of them, there were also very relevant other projects, let's call them sister projects, which look into similar challenges, topics, but maybe in other sub areas. For example, the first is more on road traffic data. The last one is on agricultural data, more specifically on an open IAC system, so for supporting the common agricultural policy. The third bullet refers more on the use of open source and machine learning technologies, etc. So there are interesting projects there, and one of the ideas, of course, and one of the, well, our challenge is to collaborate also with these projects to exchange experiences throughout the project, because they run in the same time frame. Now, a little bit on GOPEC itself. So we started last year in October, and it will run until the end of September 2022. So it's 3-year projects with a budget of 1.6 million. You have to know that CEF is working with a 75-25 funding schema, so 75 for the grant and 25 own funding. And as it has been said already previously, we are 6 partners from 5 countries. So we start indeed small in the sense we do not cover the EU 27, but currently 5 countries, although we do not exclude that we collaborate with data providers and stakeholders in other countries. So it's not excluded even in this project. KU Leuven is the coordinator as a scientific institute, but you can see that almost all the partners are small and medium enterprises. Geogramma from Spain, EPSIT from Italy, We Transform, you know them very well, I think almost all of them. From Germany, then from Denmark we have Geocom, and then also from Spain, Bilbomatica. Specific on all these partners is that we have kind of a lot of references and a lot of experience in geospatial data harmonization projects at European level. We work together also with GRC on some topics, with EAA, in particular projects, etc. But also most of our partners have experience at the national level in different supporting different Inspire implementations or SDI developments throughout Europe. Basically what we will do is to work effectively on this second objective, so to provide access to harmonized thematic open data sets and the metadata. That's a requirement, but we decided to focus on a few subsectors. Environment, that's still broad, of course. There we are quite open, but also emergency and disaster. And also there, you will see through use case assessment, we might also include a few others. Even, for example, there is one idea to work also on COVID, for example, which is more health than really environment, of course. What will we do in practice? Also, I think stressed by Alex, and we can certainly confirm that we start to work with stakeholders. Stakeholders is to be seen at large, of course, data providers, but also users of geospatial data in different contexts for environmental policy making, etc. Also experts that are already working on the topic, etc. So we're quite open, and therefore we started the project with a kind of stakeholder assessment, who's working on what, who has data, etc., etc. Come back to that later on. So that's a very important step in our action. Then we will look into more detail. I will not say too much because there is separate presentations on that, on data use scenarios and workflows that we know about and in which data are used, but where usually the challenge to have harmonized data sets is coming up, and where they really need qualitative and quantitative data. And we want also to analyze the cost and the benefits of harmonizing data set or providing harmonized data sets. So we will have also an in-depth data assessment focusing on the 5 countries, but we also will look into the rest of Europe. So maybe not the same depth of assessment, but nevertheless, we will do that. We'll also look, of course, into the existing data models, not only Inspire, but amongst others, Inspire, open data that are existing, and other data flows that are existing. We will look into. We might also look into Copernicus data, etc. And of course, there will be a big chunk of work to be done where we will try new innovative ways to do data harmonization and to do the data processing to harmonize the data, full workflow. The basic idea is also to check how far we can go in the automation of all of this and how that would work. And when it comes up to data transformation processes, there we'll also look into not only existing tools and technologies, but also maybe how they can be improved or new methods to do that. I should stress maybe here that this type of project allows also to really, as it is said by Alex, to experiment with new ways of doing things. So we do not have a predefined work method and tools that we just apply and then try to generate the harmonized data sets. No, we'll try also new methods and fine tune existing approaches, etc. And then again, comes back the stakeholders. We want to work together with them in different iterations. So it's not at the very end that we will ask, what do you think about this? But we want to involve data providers and users throughout the whole process lifetime. And then, of course, we will focus also on the lessons learned and then also to see what that means in the long run, not just to have an exploitation plan, but to have a real idea on a sustainable track for the future so that it can be taken over by other data providers, by other stakeholders, that the methodology can be reused, the tools can be used and reused, etc. And so we'll go also have some lessons learned, not only on the technical or the technological aspects, but also on cost benefit aspects, on also organization, maybe other constraints that we encountered throughout the project. We will document and we will have lessons learned from that. We organize the work in 6 work packages, sorry. So we are currently in the action preparation phase. As I said, we started really with assessing the stakeholders, potential stakeholders. Of course, we started in the 5 countries, but we have also some other stakeholders already identified. We will do that data assessment, etc. Then we are already looking in use cases, and then we do, of course, in the second work package, a more detailed design and development of the data harmonization and integration processes. Also part of that work package is, for example, looking into existing tools, but also maybe development of some new tools, fine-tuning, etc. And then the real testing of the approach and the new tools or the adapted tools and the selected data sets and the whole process will be done in work package 3. We call it testing and validating, where we combine data and try to generate useful data for end users for different applications. And then, of course, part of that is also to publish them that you see in the lower box, because that's one of the requirements. It's not just to put on the shelf afterwards, but to publish the data in the European Data Portal with the metadata required. We will do some testing and validation also specifically on those aspects. And throughout the project, of course, we will have quality assurance and evaluation. Evaluation includes, in fact, the feedback from a more detailed feedback from the stakeholders, the users, the data providers that were involved, etc. And then, of course, we have the traditional other work packages and which are more supporting dissemination and impact, but the sustainability is a particular case. And for example, there I should also mention that we will develop also training materials, a package or one or more packages, so that others can also repeat and do the same type of work and use of the same type of tools afterwards in other settings, in other thematic areas, etc., in other countries, etc., etc. And so, of course, we will do the management of the project. Here we are in the overview. I will not discuss these. The different activities are subdivided in tasks. We are now in the beginning of month 9. And of course, you can see that the stakeholder assessment has been largely done, but we are continuing, in fact, and we hope to deliver also some documents very soon. But some of the work will be expressed in more detail in the next presentations. That will be done by my colleague Mark and also by Torsten and Giacomo in the other presentations. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you very much, Danny. And with that, I think we actually wanted to go to the first Slido pod, if I remember correctly.
Yeah.
So let me just start that. Okay, and I'm going to take back the screen sharing for a moment.
Yeah, yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so everybody should see the screen and be able to go to that. So the first question we actually wanted to ask you all is how familiar you are with the Open Data Directive.
Torsten, excuse me, we can't see slides or
oh, okay.
I have to stop sharing, sorry. I think. Yeah, sorry.
No,
now you should be, okay, yeah. Okay, sorry.
Yeah. Yeah, I also had to click one more button. Sorry for that. It was on my second screen, so not really on directly visible. Okay, it's good to see the majority already started working towards compliance, at least at N. No, it's new to me. Well, at least nobody's saying it's not relevant to me. Close to 30 now. Right, so a little bit more experience has shown that it's worthwhile waiting for about 2 minutes. Okay, so for the majority, I think that's pretty clear by now. It's a new directive, but a large party already knows about it, and some have started working towards compliance. So it's going to be very interesting to see how we can kind of support both of these and also maybe do a little bit of education. Okay, so I would say thank you very much for your input on that. I'm also going to take a quick look at whether there's any Q&A, but apparently there isn't. So I'm taking it that so far there are no questions. Was anything in the chat maybe? I think Daya, you wanted to monitor that?
Yes, there is one question related to use of UNGGIM Europe data specification as an output. And we see one confirmation that this will be indeed included as well. If you want to reflect maybe a bit more.
Yeah, I just read the question. I think in the part of the work that we are currently doing, assessing the data, it's going beyond Inspire, of course, it's different data sets that might be relevant. And it's a good idea, by the way, to look into the work ongoing in UNGGIM. I think we are aware about the initiative, so we certainly will take that on our plate, and we will find out if this type of data and data specifications are relevant for the different use cases we'll do.
Yeah, exactly.
We will not exclude any initiative or infrastructure that exists. And I think UNGGIM is doing important work currently on reference data. Yeah.
Okay.
There are two more questions. Do we still have time for them?
Yeah, I would like to go.
Yeah. So one question is related to the concept of data integrators and stewards. And the question is if there is a need to work more on data management body of knowledge framework, and if this will be widely investigated and supported as also for spatial data management.
Maybe I can take that one.
Yes, please.
Thanks, Daria. So thanks, Martin, for asking. I think nothing is carved in stone here. I think what is important to emphasize is that when we have different data, which I think is in the spirit of the data strategy, coming from different sources, we will have a lot of need to do something like extracting, transforming, loading, someone to really orchestrate the whole process. Otherwise, it remains a patchwork. And could be that the data steward, data integrator, or whatever we call it, is a startup company that stays in the middle, could be a public authority, could be one of the big players. I think there are very many different ways. Data management body might be one. But I think what is important is that we will really and more data available will mean more need of someone to act in the middle to put all the pieces together to make something like a continuous useful fabric. I hope this answers the question.
Mm-hmm. Yes, thank you, Alex. And the last question is a little bit more related to after the end of this project. So is it foreseen that there will be any operational framework that will maybe continue working on this harmonization and especially in geographic information?
I see that's directed to me, but if any other member of the consortium want to add, maybe I can give first ideas on this. I think there will be several outcomes and outputs from the project that are tangible. Of course, what we need to do is we will create new improved harmonized data sets with the metadata that should be published. That's very clear because this is also a requirement in the call. But of course, one of the more important things maybe is that we hope that our work process, the way we are doing the data harmonization, the workflow, the tools supporting that, etc., that it can be reused. So the idea is indeed that it is sustainable. It's not just for this project and then we put it on the shelf. So we want it to be reused in other settings for other teams, in other countries, by other data providers, etc., etc. So in that sense, that will become available. We started already discussing how that can become available. I mean, discussions on types of licenses. So there are maybe different types of licenses for the tools and for, the data are clear because it's open data, but many other parts are maybe to be discussed, but that will be clarified and there will be kind of a well-thought approach from that perspective as well. For example, training material will be made available as under Creative Commons, a very useful license so that it can be reused by anyone, etc. Then you have a good question. How will that become available? The governance. That is not yet decided or even not yet discussed, but we have it on our plate. So we'll certainly have this discussion, how we can manage it. Is it to be done and maintained by the market, or is it an authority, as you ask? Or a specific organization that then can host and exploit the results, still to be seen. And we are very keen to discuss that also with other existing organizations that work on the same topic, of course.
Yeah, maybe
But
just
there's no decision. Yeah.
Just to add a little bit to that, so from our perspective, it's clear that, I mean, I've always been advocating that the work that we're doing on open data, on Inspire and so on, is building up an infrastructure. And naturally, there's kind of a build-up phase, and this project helps contribute to that by, on the one hand, supporting some development on the side of the tooling that is available. And that is something that everybody will be benefiting from. So there's things that will go into the Hail Studio open source software, for example, that everybody will be able to use. But of course, there's also our objective to really have stable processes so that these data sets are not harmonized once, but rather updated continuously, that they are expanded, that we can scale to other countries and so on, exactly what Alex described in his introductory presentation. And naturally for us, that's also what we want to make sure what happens in the end. We don't want to do projects like this one, which is co-funded for us, so not 100% paid. And then at the end, basically say, yeah, and it's not relevant anymore. So there's a, from our side, as the, let's say, the main technological developer in this project, there's a clear commitment that we want to build things that last and not something that's just there for the project. But I think now, if it's okay, I would like to hand over to Mark for having a deep dive into the use cases and how they drive this project. So Mark, can you take over presenting, or should I bring up the slides again? Ah, okay, seems to work. Great.
Okay, welcome. So I'm Mark Olieslagers from KU Leuven, the Spatial Applications Division. I'm the project leader, practical sense. I'm going to present you how datasets can create value and how we approach that in the GoPack project by starting from use cases. So the use case as starting point is important because this means that, well, we will end up with something that's really tangible and it's really in the field. Of course, a use case is always cross-border. In the real world, things are not do not end at a geographical boundary, and things also do not end at thematic boundaries. As already explained, we start from the 5 countries which are in the consortium, but we surely will look wider. We will engage data sets from outside these 5 countries where it's possible or where it's useful. For the thematic side, well, of course, in reality, the inspired teams always have a threat in the real world. It's not that it's vertical silos that don't touch each other. And crossing these boundaries is one of the main goals in the project. And as said, we do that by focusing on use cases where all these crossings really happen. It's already mentioned that we cover environment, emergency, and disaster management. We look at that in the broad side, again, because in the real world, there are always other teams and other domains that play a part in a real use case. Okay, so from a use case, we analyze what data is needed. And of course, inspired thematic data sets are very important. But if the use case needs it, we also look at other data. We look at non-inspired geospatial data. This might be open data. This might be private data, and this might be crowdsourced, and so on. But we also look at non-geospatial data. The main point here again is we do not start from Inspire. We do not start from a certain data set. We start from a use case, and we really use the data that is needed for that use case. We look around what's available. We look around what's missing. And we look at the differences between, for example, the different countries that are engaged in the project or in that specific use case. Specifically for Inspire, I think what's important to mention is that we, by going over the borders of the 34 teams that are available in Inspire, that we are more looking at the almost 340 spatial data objects that are available in Inspire. So Inspire now has the data catalog, where instead of only accessing the data through the team, where you can really look for specific data objects that you need. And that's something that we will do also. So again, we will not take a whole thematic data set. We will take those objects that are needed for the use cases. We might, of course, look a little bit broader if that gives more value to the data that we will work on. And we also look, of course, at the other data that are available, specific what is needed for this use case. So how do we build a high-value data set that is fit for the use case that we are working on? Of course, by selecting the correct data, but then these data need to work together. And then we have, of course, the magic word harmonization. And harmonization, to really reach a status where the data is useful, then harmonization is on different levels. It's on the content of the data. Where, of course, for Inspire, there's already a lot of work done, but it's never at the end. And for different other data sources, there will probably be more work there, but that will be assessed in the project. The level of detail is important. Data structure. As an example, we know already that for some data sets, data can have attributes which are probably available at local level, but which are not part of the Inspire data. So we can change the data structure, add attributes that are needed, and so on. Of course, we need to talk the same language if we want to be able for data to cooperate. So we will get vocabularies and so on. And then, of course, the accessibility of the data is very important. There's no use to have, let's call it a high-value data set if nobody can use it. So license conditions have to be clear and also have to be harmonized, so that at the moment that a data set is to be used, that everybody immediately know what can be done with it. Okay, so the words agile and actor collaboration and are already mentioned before, and this is reflected in our way of working. So as mentioned, we start from the stakeholder defined use cases. So we really went to stakeholders, we really looked at administrations and so on. What's important for you? What use cases do you want to work on? Where do you have problems with your data in situations that are important for you? So we defined a set of use cases. We did not make a final selection yet. You can have your input there later on. And from these use cases, we identify the data sources that are needed. To do that in a structured way, we also analyze the process and the workflow and the data flow within the use case. So we do a use case analysis and we see how data are integrated in the use case, at what point they are used, and so on, how the data collaborate. So like that, we collect our data sources that are needed for the use cases. And then, of course, because we have, first of all, this cross-thematic issue, and we also have the cross-border, let's say the cross-country or the cross-region borders, we gonna assess these data that we need in the different countries, in the different regions, and so on. And we start comparing and together with the stakeholders agreeing what is really needed for this use case. Sometimes for Inspire, that might be that the data is already fit for use, because in the end, the Inspire teams also looked at use cases at the moment that those data sets were composed. But probably in most cases, there will be an extension of the data models will be needed. Again, this diagonal line is very important. All this is always done in interaction with the use, let's say the use case holder, that's the stakeholder who really has to implement the use case, but also with the data providers. So the communication and the collaboration between the different actors, in this case the user of the data and the different data providers, we will really engage both of them in this process and get collaboration there. Once we have an agreement on that, we have to design alignments. As already mentioned, we will hopefully end up with these very interesting high-value data sets, but it's also important that the data set itself is not the only result. The result is also the methods that we use, documentation on problems, and so on. So that's very important. And then, of course, because we really want to have something that is practically useful, we don't stop there. We validate our results. If needed, we go back and we work in an agile way, in an iterative process. Probably we also will not start with all data together, but build further and further. And once we have a result, we always, of course, also couple back to the stakeholder of the use case itself. So that's how it will practically work. So you see there will be a lot of interaction and a lot of iteration where use case, where stakeholders, data providers, users, and so on are really engaged in the process. Okay, we already have a set of use cases that we want to work on in the project. It's already said we are working on these three domains, and at this moment we have 17 use cases proposed. It's important to know that the use case is not like a fixed thing at this moment. You will see that in the numbering that some numbers disappeared. That is just because we thought that these use cases are so similar that it's probably better to create a high-value data set that covers them all. I'll quickly go over the use cases that we are looking at now, so you can have your you can give us feedback on what you think is important. So the intermodal routing use case is about optimizing intermodal container transport to improve estimate time of arrival and to reduce carbon emissions. The future forest use case, due to climate change, a broad range of factors influence forest healthiness. And in this case, we will try to bring together all data that's used to assess the effect of climate change on forests, and of course also how to tackle these problems. The Fairport use case provides harmonized spatial data augmented with artificial intelligence based on aerial photographs. So it's about, for example, no-fly zones for drones based on these data. The PNoise project, use case is trying to get an accurate view on noise, like noise data, and see how noise affects population, and to make this data available on, for example, decision makers when new facilities are designed. The Coast project works on coastal flooding and how this affects population and infrastructure. The index project, the index use case, there the idea is to make sure that we have all data ready at the moment that an industrial hazard, like an explosion, happens. As you know, in disaster management, speed is very important. So there it's very important that at the moment that something happens, that you have the data ready and immediately usable. The Pangea project brings all data together that's important to support the selection of locations for seismic monitoring systems stations. So that's something really different, but of course related to disaster management. The ground and drink water use case collects all data that's needed to preserve and secure the availability, the accessibility, and the quality of European water supplies. So this can be about contamination of water, but for example, as we have the problem at this moment in Flanders, about water levels, groundwater levels. The PopFire project works on data that's to make it quickly accessible, to quickly assess the effects of wildfires on population and infrastructure. And landslides does the same on landslides, but it goes a little bit broader because it also does a hazard assessment to look where landslides are most probable to happen. So that was a whole list of projects, and I think that in the next poll we will ask your ideas about this. Okay, these are the last ones. We have the hydrological spills, where we look at the effect of chemical spills on water. We have the PROBAF thing, where the PROBAF use case, where population, roads, and buildings can be affected by flood events, and we look at that. The GeoCovid Watch is a special project where we want to see how integration and geospatial data and technologies can contribute to a common understanding of the different phases and of the pandemic and its impacts. So it's more an assessment on what was there and how can it be better if something similar happens again, or maybe in the next phase of the COVID problem. And then the last one is the pollution tracing, where we look at what happens if we find a contamination of water. We want to trace where it's going, trace back where it comes from, to minimize the effects and to, as fast as possible, solve the problem at the source. Okay, thank you. I give the word back to Torsten.
Yeah, thank you as well. Some of you might have noticed that I've started the next poll. So let me see if I can already share my screen again. All right. There's actually 3 questions in that related to the presentation that Mark just gave. So the first one has to do with what you think in general terms impacts the value of a data set most. Then there's a question about, yeah, some of the use cases that we've seen. I think it's 10 or so that seem to be the limit, which you can pick one of or multiple ones that you think are particularly high value. And then there's also already a question asking about whether you are already active in yeah, sharing. Let's see. I've had that once a few days ago as well. It takes a moment before the poll appears. Seems to be quite a few responses already, but not that many. Yeah. If that's the same issue like it was once before, what I'll actually do is I'll switch to this view, and then we can check this out here. Okay, so what impacts the value of a data set most from your experience? So that's interesting. We have so far at 14 people who submitted this, 44% of up-to-dateness. Yeah, so I think clearly on a lot of data sets, when it's simply outdated, it adds little value. That also emphasizes that it's really important to focus on the process of keeping data sets up there continuously and not just doing something once in a project and then forget about it. Let's have a look at what the results look like for the use case potential. Okay, we have EU-wide ground and drinking water protection very high in the list. Noise-aware spatial planning, forest transformation is also high up, and geophysical risk zone assessment. Let's have a look at the last one as well. Do you already publish data under open data licenses? 75% say yes, some of our data. 7% say yes, all of our data. Yeah, that's something we see a lot. That there is like a view that's intended for the outside that's being published, but of course there's more complex, raw, unfiltered, etc. data that might not really be suitable, that anyway needs to be processed to some degree. Only 3% say we will not publish open data, but about 20% don't know yet. And yeah, to be honest, in my experience with data providers, I think the bar at the lower bottom tends to be higher. So quite a lot of organizations either know that they're committed to open data or they are unsure. It seems to be the two most common, but that's also reflected here. Let's have a quick look back at the first one. Now I have a little over 30 something. Yeah, so number 1 is up-to-dateness. Number 2 is quality of attributive data. Number 3 is spatial coverage. And then we get down to spatial resolution or scale, a number of attributes, and ease of use and target environment as well. But all of these only have a few percent. So that's interesting. So really up-to-dateness is the number 1 thing. I'm kind of surprised by that because to be honest, I was expecting ease of use and target environment to win after all the discussions we've had in the last years about complexity of data sets and making sure that they get used. But this sounds to me like actually if the data is up to date, has high quality attributive data and good spatial coverage, people will use it, even if there's a bit of an extra work required. Yeah, the use case ones, there's still the EU-wide ground and drinking water protection that led out, followed by the future forest. Yeah, and then several that are also high up on the list. Okay, not too much has changed on the open data poll, so I would actually continue. I think now it's my turn to actually tell you a little bit about one of the use cases.
Excuse me, can we have maybe a reply to?
Yeah, sorry, I forgot. Yeah, of course, sorry. Yeah.
So I think that so there are two important questions. One, it is related, it's asking for clarification of high-value data set. Is this the same definition as it is in the Open Data Directive? And how this, what you are doing here is related to that definition.
Mm-hmm.
And the second one is more on data quality, what to do, how to work on issues like no data, low quality data, outdated data. And related to this, another project has been mentioned, which is called Geospatially Enabled Ecosystem for Europe, or GeoE3. And I would propose that maybe we don't spend a lot on this project, but maybe this project can come in contact with you for further information.
Yeah, that sounds very, very interesting. Absolutely. I mean, the message goes to everybody. If you have something here that you want to discuss in a follow-up, please do so. Normally, we would do that in the booth or something like that in Dubrovnik. So in this case, please reach out to us via email. We'll have the contact info later on the slides as well.
Sorry, Torsten, in order to save time regarding the data quality question, I propose to postpone to the to my after my presentation, after yours.
And are you also, who's going to address the question about the high-value data sets?
No, this is better that you address immediately, I guess.
Yeah, that's what I thought too. Yeah, so in my perspective, the directive basically leaves quite a few things open in what exactly defines a high-value data set, but what we needed is an operative definition, so one that allows us to make it transparent why we are selecting certain data sets that we're working with. So in our view, we've kind of, at least for internal purposes, clarified that definition that is there in the directive and tried to make it as quantitative as possible. So that in the end, when we select a number of data sets to add to the EDP in the end, it's clear why we did that, and that it wasn't just basically because we liked data set A better than B. Danny, I'm not sure if you want to add a sentence or two to that.
I want to add something.
Yeah, Mark.
Okay, so because it's also in the questions, so we also try to make sure that the high-value data set is not too focused on maybe one specific use case, or we broaden the use case, or we broaden the data set by combining use cases. For example, the use case on water, it was first only focused on water quality, and we added, because that's also a problem, the issue of the groundwater levels and so on. We by combining use cases, we make the high-value data set more broader usable than just for one use case.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. The only thing I have to add is maybe that in what we will do, I think we will explain very well what is the reasoning behind our targeting or tagging of high-value data sets. As it has been said by it's more the operational definition, but we will make this very clear, because I agree that maybe there might be some confusion with the general term that is used in other contexts, but we'll clarify that in the document. The thing we will do. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much. Yeah, looking at the time, I think I'd like to continue and take a quick look at one of the use cases in particular. It was the one that came out on number 2 in the poll that we did before. And yeah, it's called futureforest.ai. So let me just give you a quick introduction. I think most of you are aware that yeah, we are entering a phase where climate change and other pressures are really seriously affecting our forests across Europe. And in countries like Germany, up to 50% of the tree stands are acutely endangered right now. That means that large amounts of the trees will die within just a few years. The main reasons being the heat, the drought, but also the prevalence of pathogens like bark beetles and the like, which have been far more common in the last few years. And the way to deal with that is, of course, to first identify which areas of the forests are critically endangered. So this is, for example, this is part of a map and showing in different colors which parts of the forest are endangered to which scope. And yeah, it's like I mentioned before, depending on what time level you look at, up to 90% or more of the tree stands are not really viable. So we're entering a huge problem from a biodiversity perspective, but also from a climate change perspective. You know, that forests should actually be storing CO2 instead of emitting it, which they do when they will die. So that's really a huge problem that needs to be addressed proactively. So we can't just wait for all the tree stands to fall over. We really need to do something right now. And the thing that's typically being done is to look at so-called forest transformation project. That means that we look at what kind of trees are currently there in a stand. So we identify the species and the combination of species and so on. And think about a plan how to migrate, so to speak, how to transform the current types of forests to forests that we expect to be more resilient to the stresses of climate change, but also to other factors like the aforementioned pathogens. Yeah, and there's basically 3 key questions which need to be answered to manage such a forest transformation. The first one is which stands need to be treated with particular urgency. So those are those that are most in danger by, for example, being weakened and then maybe a storm blowing them over and things like that. The second key question is which forest development types, and within these, which tree species groups and varieties would be suitable to that particular location. So if you have, for example, a forest owner who has some 20, 30 hectares of forest, and they need to check whether it's a danger, they realize that that is, and they wonder, okay, but what kind of things, what kind of plants should I be planting there? Yeah, and then the third question is how to actually carry out that conversion. So what should I do first, in which order? How can I kind of ensure that in this whole process my biodiversity isn't lost, and that the climate function isn't lost or is improved, and that my economic yield is also not lost, yeah? And that's one of the big dangers, of course, that many forest owners still look at, is that if they now have to take some urgent measures, it might still help them recover some of the economic value compared to when the catastrophe is already there. Yeah, and to answering these key questions is actually a really complex data problem. So at WeTransform, we started working with forest data about 2 or 3 years ago, and we started to appreciate what kind of challenge it is to actually understand the kind of conditions at any given site and to collect the data needed to make these decisions that we described before. So there's more than 30 parameters that influence these. Conditions tend to be hyper-local. So if you think of, for example, you have a small ridge within your forest, then the conditions there are different than in a small valley. And there's very limited in situ data. So usually only for a part of the forest, there is actually data, for example, on what tree stands are there, how old the trees are, and so on, and also what the conditions in the ground are. And so knowledge tends to be also quite fragmented. So maybe some of you saw the AI workshop that Clinton from Minerva gave yesterday. And he also described that first humans need to agree before systems can agree. And that's also very true in this case. So you will see that people from one state have a completely different model and understanding of their forests than from another state. And I'm talking like states that are next to each other and have similar tree species, not like maybe sub-Saharan and Finland or something like that. There's also limited reference data, and there's in some places also limited causal knowledge, i.e. understanding why certain things are happening now when tree stands are dying. Yeah, and just to give you a short look into what kind of data sets are required to support these decisions. Obviously, there's elevation, which is important for exposure and for understanding also the elevation and a few other factors. There's the temperature. Precipitation is important, but also soil conditions, for example. So basically, which kind of chemicals are available in the soil? Is it balanced or not? Soil types are important. And then there's all the more or less specific information about the trees themselves, like there's the low land cover information is important, tree sizes, tree mixes, species, inventory, etc. And of course, information on pathogens and insect appearances is also important. And then finally, the climate scenario. So if we know, for example, that in 80 years, the temperature in the summer is going to go up by 6 degrees or something, that's a very important information. And it's not out of the question, actually, that will happen in some areas at least. Yeah, so our approach to that, so I should say that we address this within a separate project, but it's a very well defined use case. So we thought it makes sense to also look at it in the context of this project, is to build on harmonized data. As far as possible, that will be Inspire data, because that would enable us to apply the solution not just in one place, like let's say a state in Germany, but ideally all across Europe. On top of that, we heavily utilize so-called explainable artificial intelligence approaches, which have the advantage that you actually understand the output that the model provides to some degree. So you can see why certain parameters influenced the outcome of the model recommendation. You can weight them differently and so on, and do all of that through a specific interaction framework that really allows you to understand these explanations for each basically proposal that the system makes. And all of that then forms a solution which helps us better make decisions during forest transformation. And our vision is within this project, we really want to make the best decision support tools available to everybody. and also to enable cooperation between researchers, consultants, and forest owners of all sizes. So, for example, in Germany, we have many small forest owners who normally can't really utilize these resources compared to like the gigantic ones who have 10,000s of hectares. And yeah, we want to make sure that everybody can really access these tools. Yeah, and in the end, of course, yeah, as a German, I'm kind of a tree hugger anyways. We want to make sure that as many of our forests, yeah, survive as possible. Yeah, we do that in 3 scenarios. So basically, first one is that a forest owner can use these tools in a self-service environment. And the second one, the forest owner works together with a forest expert. And the third one is a forest researcher who kind of uses the information provided by all others to better understand how the transformation is going on and what can be learned from that. Yeah, so that was kind of a quick run through one of these. We have prepared a number of polls on that particular topic as well. So I'm going to stop that survey, go on to the next and start the third one. So you can now respond to 3 questions on the future forest AI case. Again, I think I'll go to this. There's 2 very easy questions, I think. They are basically, does climate change affect forests in your country? From 1, no impact, to 5, massive impact, and whether there are already tools and resources in place to address the problem in your country. Again, from 1 to 5. Yeah, and then finally, the question is a bit more concrete. So is this a use case that you think that you have relevant data for? You might remember the list. And is this something that you could actually respond to? Okay, so I'll switch to the view on whether that's being, whether there are any responses already. Yeah, we have 10 votes on this already. Yeah. So this one is pretty clear so far. Let's have a look at this. Okay, so at least there's not none in most countries. That's good. So there's some work, there's some knowledge apparently already about what's going on there. So if we look again at the climate change effect, yeah, that's basically between 4 and 5. So impact is definitely somewhere between very big and massive. Let's have a quick look at the conditions. So about 90% would allow usage of the data under an open data license. That's very good to see. Some say, okay, they would charge a marginal cost license fee, which is, as far as I know, also in line with the PSI and so on. Some would say, okay, full cost license fee, and we have some who want to have access to the tools or derived data products in exchange for providing access. As you can see, multiple responses are allowed. That you should usually reflect that for some data sets, it would be possible to make them open data, as we saw earlier. And for others, we actually need to split that, need to provide them in a different way. Brief look at this. So here we are at 41-41. I'm going to leave the poll open so you can still respond, but I will actually hand over to Giacomo for his presentation, as we are running a bit late. And then for any questions, we will actually address them at the end, if that's okay. Giacomo, do you want to take over as a presenter?
Yes, please.
Okay, stop sharing. You should be able to present.
Yeah. I think you can see the screen now. Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you, Thorsten. Just a clarification, when in the previous slides you saw the name of the partner, EPSIT is the acronym of Epsilon Italia, just not to confuse that we are the same thing. So let's go quickly to these few slides to emphasize which is our foreseen role for the inspired data providers, the efforts that we are envisaging with those we are already in contact with, and the benefits for them to being involved in the project. So the key questions that we would like to answer together with them is why an inspired data provider should participate in OPEG, how much its participation will cost to it, and how its participation will fit into the project work plan. And let's start from the last question, saying that this is the role that we are envisaging and we are already building on thanks to the close contacts with the inspired data providers we are already in contact with in the several use cases. We have to say that we are trying to build here what has been described in many previous presentations during this Inspire Online conference related to the data ecosystems and also somehow to data spaces, in which the importance of involving multiplicity of stakeholders and trying to bridge together all the different gaps that they have in a separate way, but then concurring in creating issues and obstacles when all the contribution will come to an integrated effort to execute, let's say, the use cases with which we tried to sample typical usages addressing problems related to high-value data sets and the future and the actualization and the concrete evolution of the current data strategies in Europe. So there are different roles. Of course, it is important to highlight that inspired data providers are a subset of the entire stakeholders involved, because there are also data users. Sometimes data providers are also data users, but some in other cases not. So in that case, we would like to emphasize the different perspectives and different contributions. So first of all, they already provided feedback on use cases, and in this specific, under this specific role, the problem that we would like to address is to provide feedback on what we are referring to as data documentation. In that case, it is referring to issues related to data quality and on the level at which, the extent to which the data can serve the needs of the use cases that we are building together with them. Contribute to solve issues related to existing data in terms of data quality and data consistency of their own data. Just to make a practical example, in one of the use cases mentioned with one of our data providers, one of the first questions that have been addressed is that one of the data sets concurring to the execution of the use case has currently possible problems to go fully open. And because the requirement of the project, as Danny mentioned, is that everything produced out of this project should be published under the European Data Portal with a full open license, this started, it was not the stop of the interaction, but it was the beginning of an intense discussion, and we are still currently solving together with the data provider how to cope with these possible restrictions they have, because there is the full willingness of the data provider to proceed and to continue with the use case. So because we built together with them the use case, there is a common interest to solve all the problems. So generally speaking, and replying to the previous questions, addressing the, for sure, we know we are not living in an ideal world, and the majority of the data assessed to be used in the use cases are not yet fully matching the requirements, but the ambition is to, thanks to the close relationships we are establishing with them, to overcome one by one all of them. Of course, then they can provide feedback on final data, and as well participating in workshop and contributing to the dissemination activities. In terms of effort, thanks also to an initial experience that we are making in the first phase, we are envisaging not so much person days for the data providers. This is an estimation that you can see for each of the envisaged roles in terms of person days, so half a day for each use case they are involved in, from 1 to 5 days in the role to contribute to solve the issues, half a day for each data set on regarding the feedback on final data, and then we are foreseeing a number of workshops to involve them to give them the voice for the results that are ongoing. So it is we have to say that the COVID emergency impacted severely the flow of the initial phase. Just to make an example, one of the stakeholders acting as data provider was and still is the National Department of Civil Protection in Italy. But then when the emergency raised up, they clearly and very legitimately said, please stop chasing us because we have now more important things to do, but we are interested to continue to follow up the project. That's why the flow of activity, even though shown in the classical Gantt as a serial sequence of activities, will be run in parallel. But saying that the effort is mainly concentrated in terms of person days, this is relaxing quite a lot the data providers, which are more concerned about the formal involvement through letters of engagement, signature of their authorities, appointment of contact persons, and so on. But also this process is running quite smoothly, I would say. Lastly, the benefits expected, thanks to which the data providers so far agreed to participate through also formal commitment, but also substantial willingness to contribute, is to, of course, to gain feedback about the usability of its of the data sets, to learn how to solve possible issues related to the usability of the data sets, of course, to get back data sets with an improved usability thanks to the 2 previous steps. Let's say, basically, to have back data sets fully harmonized, which is one of the worries that expressed most of them, which is let's say an intermediate achievement that they will get out of this project, but is just an intermediate one, because as we said, we go beyond the harmonization. Of course, to be prepared for the Open Data Directive, which is also in line with the results of the poll that we saw so far, and to learn how value can be created out of its dataset. And this is, we have to take in mind the replies that Thorsten provided also to the question, because this concept of the high-value dataset is highlighted and mentioned in the Open Data Directive and also in the data strategy. But as we see, for the time being, there is a list of categories in an annex, and then the practical approach that we are proposing in this project, I think, is in line and can provide a good ground for the real value to be created. I think I finished, and there should be the Thorsten, you can take back the control and go to the slide.
Yeah, thank you very much. And, so yeah, let's use the last few minutes as good as we can. I'm going to share my screen a final time. So there's one more question. One thing that we are particularly interested as well to hear from you is, so given that if you're a provider of Inspire identified data, which of the following benefits of a participation in the GOPEC project would be most valuable for you? So you saw that there's a detailed feedback process. So we would be making sure that you get feedback on the usability of your data sets. You can learn the materials we generate to solve usability issues for your data sets. You can get back data sets with an improved usability because we process them, fully harmonized data sets as well. So that's another thing. Yeah, and also to learn how value can be created from the data sets. Okay, so far 6 responses. Let's see. I'll wait for a bit of stability before I comment on anything. And meanwhile, I should add that I also had 3 questions from the audience in this. One was about experience outside the EU. I gave a quick reply to that, that due to our collaboration with Minerva, we also looked at Canada, where there's very large private forest owners and managers, and these seem to be quite a bit more advanced in several areas. Outside of that, we don't yet have a lot of experience. Positive effects of climate change on forests. Yeah, from the discussions we've had with the forest experts, naturally there are going to be some winners region-wise and species-wise, but the transition is really hard, and we stand to lose a lot of diversity and also CO2 capacity. So I would need to know a bit more about the concrete positive effects to comment on that. And the last one that was asked, should data of automatic sensors be stored in a centralized repository or a distributed one? And from my perspective, the risk of distribution is always performance and actually maintaining accessibility. So if you want to really use that as infrastructure, distributed can make it a bit harder. However, I'm actually a big fan of the concept that was also introduced by Alex called the personal data space. So I think that organizations and also people, like natural persons, should be able to store all the data they collect in like a data pod in a local data space that is then made accessible via standardized interfaces, so that it's easy for, like value add applications and solutions to actually access that. So I would favor kind of a combination of those two, because this would allow, for example, the owner of the data at any point to say, okay, I don't want this and that to happen with my data anymore. So I'm now stopping that, basically working towards higher autonomy and control. Let's go back to the live polls. So that's going to be interesting. So we now have 30-ish responses, and pretty much everything's equally balanced, except to get back data sets with an improved usability, which got 0%. So that's interesting. Number 1 is to be prepared for the Open Data Directive. So compliance is definitely one thing that's important. And we have 3 items which are equal: to get feedback about the usability of the data sets, to get harmonized data sets back, and to learn how value can be created out of the data sets. So yeah, I think that's very interesting. And yeah, I think the interesting thing for us is, of course, that this will enable us to focus a bit better on how we are going to work with you. And yeah, before we run more overtime, I want to use this moment in time to really give you another opportunity to reach out to us in the next days or weeks. Please contact us if you want to get involved with this project in any way. Tell us what you expect out of it. We can also then send you a formal invitation. We do already have invited quite a few of the data providers that we know, but if you feel that yeah, this is something that you'd like to contribute to and be involved with, we would be very happy to hear from you. There's also a website available on the GoPack project, go-pack.eu. I'm going to go to it quickly, where you can get our contact info and also learn a bit more about the project. And yeah, with that, I would like to thank everybody, both the presenters for the, I think, wide range of topics on this project, but also all the participants. And yeah, I hope to be able to work with all of you together in the scope of the project. And that's it from my side. Not sure if there's anything that's still open in terms of questions.
There are several suggestions what kind of other activities or actions should be considered. Among them is the European Commission or the European Union Green Deal, and information on and communication on biodiversity related to forest information system and forest observatory. The EU forest strategy is coming up, and there are a lot of other let's say cooperation and projects between the countries that could be considered as well. So
Right.
yeah, I will save the chat all information we said, so this information can be useful then for you to consider in the project.
Yeah, that would be very welcome. Thanks. Good. So I guess then at this point we'll.
Yep. I also see the question from Nathalie Delattre from IGN Belgium, where they are committed in a project for harmonizing data in a process that's sustainable. So of course we are not going to invent everything ourselves. It's really the idea to build on already existing initiatives that are going on. So surely we will come back to you and talk about this.
Okay. Well then, I think with this I'll end that, and yeah, I wish you all a nice continued conference and a good weekend already. So see you soon.
Same from my side. Bye. Thank you, Torsten. Thank you all. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you all. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.